The church was glowing with golden light. White roses decorated every corner, and soft piano music filled the air. Guests whispered with excitement, holding their phones ready to capture the beautiful moment. Everything looked perfect, maybe too perfect. At the back of the hall stood a young boy named Ethan, dressed neatly in a small black suit. He was only 11 years old, but his eyes looked older, tired, uncertain, and full of worry. While everyone smiled, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could barely breathe. He looked toward the altar where his father, David, stood proudly. David was tall, kind-faced, and nervous in a happy way. He kept adjusting his tie, smiling shyly as the guests admired him. After years of being alone, David had finally found love again. Or so he thought. Next to the priest stood the bride, Melissa, beautiful, elegant, and glowing in her white gown. Her smile could melt hearts, her voice gentle as she greeted everyone. But Ethan didn't trust that smile. He had seen it change before, sharp, fake, cold, when she thought no one was watching. The piano music shifted to a soft melody. The priest lifted his hand and said, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The crowd fell silent. Everyone's attention moved toward the front. But Ethan wasn't looking at the priest. His eyes were fixed on Melissa. She looked perfect, yes, but her hands were shaking. She kept glancing toward the back of the church, like she was waiting for someone. Ethan noticed every movement, every nervous glance. He didn't know what she was hiding, but his stomach twisted, as if something terrible was about to happen. He whispered under his breath, his voice trembling, "Dad, please don't do this." No one heard him. The music was too loud. The people were too happy. Only Ethan could feel that something wasn't right. He took a deep breath and looked around. That's when he saw him, a man standing outside the church window. The man wore a dark jacket and sunglasses, even though it wasn't sunny. His face was half hidden, but his eyes, cold and sharp, were fixed on Melissa. Not on the ceremony, not on the crowd, and only on her. Ethan froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Who is that man? He thought. For a second their eyes met through the glass. The man gave a small, strange smile, and then slowly he lifted his hand and tapped the window twice before walking away. Ethan's skin crawled. He turned back toward the altar. Melissa had seen him too. Her smile faded for a split second, replaced by pure fear. Then, just as quickly, she forced the smile back on her face. The priest continued, unaware of the storm building in the boy's heart. "Do you, David, take Melissa to be your lawfully wedded wife?" David smiled warmly. "I do," he said. His voice was soft but sure. The priest turned to Melissa. "And do you, Melissa, take David?" Ethan couldn't take it anymore. His hands were shaking, his throat dry. Every instinct in his body screamed, "Something is wrong." He looked at his father's happy face, and a face that had suffered years of loneliness after losing Ethan's mother. David had finally found someone who made him laugh again. Ethan didn't want to destroy that happiness. But he couldn't stay quiet either. He remembered what he'd heard Melissa whisper one night on the phone, words that still haunted him. "He doesn't know the truth." Not yet. That memory burned in his chest. And then, as Melissa opened her mouth to say, "I do," Ethan's voice cut through the hall like thunder. "Stop the wedding!" The music stopped. Gasps filled the air. Phones dropped. Every eye turned toward the trembling boy at the back of the hall. David's smile vanished. "Ethan," he said, his voice a mix of shock and confusion. Melissa froze, her lips parting slightly. Her bouquet slipped from her hand and hit the floor. The priest blinked, unsure what to do. "Young man, please." But Ethan's voice was louder now, filled with fear and anger. "Dad, she's lying to you." Whispers exploded through the crowd. "What's going on? What did he say?" "Is this part of the ceremony?" Cameras turned toward the boy. The air grew heavy, the kind of silence that feels like a storm waiting to break. David frowned, taking a step forward. "Ethan, son, what are you talking about?" Ethan pointed straight at Melissa, his eyes burning with tears. "She's not who she says she is, Dad. You can't marry her." The bride's face went pale. She took a shaky step back, her voice breaking. "Ethan, please. You don't understand? Then make me understand," the boy shouted. His small hands clenched into fists. "Why was that man outside? Why were you scared when you saw him?" David turned to Melissa, confusion turning into worry. "What man? "Melissa, what is he talking about?" Melissa stuttered, trying to find words. I don't know what he means." But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered toward the window just for a second, and David saw it. That single look shattered his calm. The guests began whispering louder. Someone recorded. The priest lowered his head, sensing that something was very wrong. Ethan's voice trembled, but he stood tall. "Dad, she's hiding something. I saw her talking to that man before. She's been lying to you." David looked between his son and his bride, his heart racing. The color drained from Melissa's face completely now. No one moved. No one spoke. The church felt like a frozen picture, a moment caught between truth and disaster. And as the silence stretched on, only one thought echoed in Ethan's mind: the truth is coming out, and nothing will ever be the same again. David met Melissa 6 months before the wedding. It was a cold evening when he walked into a small cafe after work, tired and lonely. He ordered a cup of coffee and sat near the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. That's when she appeared, Melissa. She was sitting alone at the next table, wearing a red scarf and holding a book. She smiled when their eyes met. David hadn't seen a smile that warm in years. She was charming, gentle, and spoke with kindness in her voice. After losing his wife years ago, David had never thought he could love again. But Melissa made him feel alive. They started talking that evening and never really stopped. She laughed at his jokes, listened to his stories, and looked at him as if he was the only man in the world. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Everyone around them said they were perfect together, and David began to believe it. But one person didn't: Ethan. The first time Ethan met Melissa, he didn't feel the same warmth his father did. She bent down, smiled sweetly, and said, "You must be Ethan. I've heard so much about you." Ethan nodded politely, but something in her eyes made him uneasy. It wasn't that she was unkind. She was overly kind, too perfect, too careful with her words. She brought him gifts every time she visited, from toy cars to comic books, trying too hard to win him over. At first, Ethan thought maybe he was just being unfair. His dad was happy again, and that's what mattered. But as the weeks passed, he started noticing strange things about Melissa. She avoided questions about her past. When David asked about her family, she quickly changed the topic. She said she didn't like taking pictures. Once, when David tried to post a photo of them online, she almost panicked and made him delete it, saying she didn't like attention. David laughed it off, but Ethan saw the fear in her eyes. One night, something happened that Ethan could never forget. It was late and he got up to get a glass of water. As he passed the living room, he heard Melissa's voice. She was on the phone, her tone completely different, cold, harsh, nothing like the sweet woman his father knew. Ethan stopped near the door and listened quietly. "He has no idea what I'm really here for," she said. Ethan froze. "Don't worry, I'll get it done," she continued. "Once everything's in my name, we're gone." Ethan's stomach turned. Who was she talking about? What did she mean by everything? He leaned closer, but the floor creaked and Melissa quickly ended the call. She stepped out, saw Ethan in the hallway, and smiled like nothing had happened. "Can't sleep, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Ethan forced a nod. "Just thirsty," he said, and hurried back to his room. His heart pounded as he lay awake staring at the ceiling. He wanted to tell his dad, but he knew David would never believe him. Melissa had made sure everyone saw her as perfect. The next morning, Ethan tried to hint at it. "Dad," he said while having breakfast, "do you really know Melissa well?" David smiled and ruffled his hair. "Of course I do, son. She's amazing. Why do you ask?" Ethan hesitated. "Just be careful, okay?" David chuckled. "Ethan, she's not trying to replace your mom. I know this is hard, but give her a chance." Ethan nodded silently. He wanted to believe his father, but that phone call wouldn't leave his mind. Days turned into weeks. The wedding plans started. Melissa acted sweeter than ever, helping Ethan with his schoolwork, cooking David's favorite meals and pretending to be the perfect fiancé. But Ethan watched her carefully. Every time she looked at her phone, her smile changed. One afternoon, she received a message that made her expression turn serious. She quickly deleted it, unaware that Ethan was standing behind the door watching. That evening, Ethan made a decision. He had to know the truth. 2 days before the wedding, When Melissa went out shopping for decorations, Ethan sneaked into her room. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't stop himself. He checked her purse and found a second phone hidden inside. The screen lit up with several unread messages from someone named Mark. His heart raced as he opened the chat. The last message made him gasp. It read, "Once you marry him, we'll get what we came for. Don't mess this up." Ethan's whole body froze. He scrolled up and saw more messages, plans, dates, details about David's accounts. It was clear now. Melissa wasn't marrying his father for love. She was part of a plan. Ethan quickly took pictures of the messages on his own phone, then put everything back exactly as it was. That night he tried to tell David, but his father only sighed. "Ethan, you're letting your imagination run wild. Melissa loves me." "No, Dad," Ethan shouted. "She's hiding something." David stood up, his voice gentle but firm. "Son, I know you miss your mum, but Melissa isn't trying to hurt us. She's trying to be part of our family." Ethan realized nothing he said would change his dad's mind. That's when he made a promise to himself. If his dad wouldn't, listen, he would find a way to protect him, even if it meant stopping the wedding. He didn't know how yet, but he knew one thing. Melissa wasn't what she seemed, and as the wedding day came closer, Ethan's fear only grew stronger. He could feel it in his bones. Something terrible was coming. The night before the wedding, Ethan couldn't sleep. The words he had read on Melissa's secret phone kept repeating in his head. "Once you marry him, we'll get what we came for." Those words felt like knives. He knew he had to do something, but his father had already stopped listening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. David was asleep, dreaming of a new life with Melissa. The wedding suit hung neatly on the chair beside his bed, ready for tomorrow. Ethan sat by his window, staring at the dark sky, wishing his mum was still alive. She would have believed him. She always did. Suddenly he heard a faint sound coming from the hallway, Melissa's voice. She was talking softly, her footsteps slow and careful. Ethan quickly turned off his light and opened his door just a little. He saw her walking toward the living room, holding that same hidden phone. She sat on the couch and whispered, "Yes, Mark, everything's ready. Tomorrow, it's done." Ethan's heart began to race. He leaned forward, trying to hear more. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing," she continued. "He's too kind, too trusting. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late." Her tone was sharp, nothing like the gentle voice she used around his father. Ethan bit his lip, trying not to make a sound. Melissa laughed quietly, a cold fake laugh that sent chills down his spine. "You'll get your share, Mark, don't worry," she said. "Just make sure the lawyer's papers are ready. Once the marriage is official, we'll move the money." "Then we disappear." Ethan's eyes widened. Money. That was what it was about. She didn't love his dad. She was going to marry him, take everything and run. He wanted to scream, to run and tell David right now, but he knew his father wouldn't believe him. He had already tried. If he told him again, David might even get angry. Ethan clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "I'll stop her, I promise." He didn't realize Melissa had ended the call and was now walking back down the hallway. Ethan quickly shut his door and jumped into bed, pretending to be asleep. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The door creaked open slowly, and Melissa peeked inside. Her face was calm, but her eyes looked different. Cold, watchful. She stared at Ethan for a moment, as if checking if he had heard something. Then, satisfied, she closed the door quietly and walked away. Ethan waited until her footsteps faded, then sat up, trembling. He knew he needed proof, something his dad couldn't ignore. That night, he couldn't sleep at all. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen as David and Melissa prepared breakfast together. Melissa acted sweet, smiling like nothing had happened. She kissed David's cheek, poured him coffee, and talked about how beautiful their wedding would be. Ethan sat at the table, silent, watching her every move. Every time she looked at him, she smiled too kindly, and every time she smiled, he felt sick inside. After breakfast, when Melissa went to get ready for her hair appointment, Ethan knew this was his only chance. He followed her quietly, pretending to play with his phone. As soon as she left, he ran into her room and opened her purse again. The secret phone wasn't there. He panicked, checking drawers, bags, even under the bed. Finally, he saw it lying on the dresser, half hidden under a scarf. He grabbed it quickly and turned it on. The messages were still there. More had come in that morning. One from Mark read, "Remember, no mistakes. Once he signs everything, send me the confirmation." Another one said, "Don't let the kid ruin this." Ethan froze. They were talking about him. His hands shook as he took pictures of every message using his own phone. He made sure to capture everything, the names, dates, even the threats. Then he placed the phone back exactly where he found it. His heart was racing so fast it hurt. He didn't know what scared him more, the fact that Melissa was a liar or that she knew he was in her way. Later that day, when David came home from picking up the wedding rings, Ethan tried again. "Dad, please, listen to me," he said, holding out his phone. "I saw her messages. She's not who you think she is." David sighed deeply, setting the rings down. "Ethan, we talked about this," he said softly. "You're upset, and I understand, but these things you're saying, they're not true. Melissa loves us." "No, she doesn't." Ethan's voice cracked. "She's lying to you. She's going to hurt you." David frowned, his expression turning serious. "Enough, Ethan. This is my decision. I'm marrying her tomorrow, and I'd really like you to be there to support me." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "Dad." But David had already turned away. Ethan went to his room, shut the door, and sat on his bed, feeling helpless. He looked at the pictures on his phone again. Every message was proof, but proof didn't matter if no one believed him. He realized he had only one option left, to reveal the truth himself in front of everyone. He didn't know how it would end, but he was sure of one thing. He couldn't let his dad say "I do" to a lie. As the evening sky turned red, Ethan whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, I'll stop her." No matter what. He didn't know that the next day would bring chaos, heartbreak, and a truth darker than he ever imagined. The sun was setting the night before the wedding. The air outside the house felt heavy, almost warning of the storm that was about to come. Ethan sat by the window in his small room, staring at the streetlight flickering outside. He hadn't eaten all day. His mind kept replaying Melissa's phone call, her cold voice, the lies she spoke so easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear her laughing with that man named Mark. Who was he? What did they really want from his dad? Those questions burned inside him like fire. Then something caught his eye. A shadow moved outside, near the gate. Ethan leaned closer to the window, squinting through the dim light. There, standing under the street lamp, was a man, tall, wearing a dark coat and smoking a cigarette. His face was half hidden, but even from a distance, Ethan could tell it was the same man he had seen in the photos on Melissa's phone. Mark. The stranger looked around, then took out his phone and made a call. Ethan opened his window just enough to hear faint bits of the conversation. "Yeah, everything's ready," the man said. "She's got him wrapped around her finger. Tomorrow it's all ours." Ethan's heart pounded. The man laughed softly, an evil laugh that made the boy's blood run cold. "No one's going to stop us, not even that kid." Ethan's breath caught. They were talking about him. He ducked quickly behind the curtain, afraid the man might see him, but curiosity kept him watching. Mark flicked away his cigarette and stepped closer to the house, his sharp eyes scanning the windows. Ethan crouched down, holding his breath. He could hear his heart thumping like a drum. After a few seconds, Mark smirked and whispered to himself, "He doesn't even know what's coming." Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Ethan waited for a long time before he finally dared to move. His hands were shaking as he closed the window. He wanted to run to his father right then, but he knew David wouldn't believe him, not after the last time. He sat on his bed, his mind racing. If that man was outside their house, it meant he was watching them, waiting for something. Ethan looked at the photos again on his phone, the messages, the proof. He knew he was right. He had to be. But proof meant nothing without someone to listen. Later that night, Ethan couldn't stay inside anymore. He needed to see for himself if that man was still out there. Quietly, he slipped out of his room, careful not to wake his dad. The floor creaked, but he moved like a shadow, opening the front door inch by inch. The cool night air hit his face. The neighborhood was silent. He stepped outside and walked toward the gate. The street lamp flickered again, casting long shadows on the Tau. Pavement? At first there was no one. Then, from the corner near the trees, he saw movement. Mark stepped out again, this time closer. Ethan froze. The man smiled when he saw him. "Shouldn't you be in bed, kid?" he said, his voice deep and mocking. Ethan's throat went dry. "What do you want from my dad?" he asked, trying to sound brave. Mark took a slow step forward. "That's grown-up business," he said, smirking. "You should stay out of it. It's better for you that way." Ethan clenched his fists. "I know you're lying. Melissa doesn't love him." "You're using him." The man chuckled darkly. "Smart boy. But knowing too much can be dangerous." He leaned closer. "So here's some advice. Keep your mouth shut tomorrow or things might get messy." Ethan's heart raced. He wanted to shout, to call for help, but his voice wouldn't come out. The man gave him one last cold look, then turned and walked away into the darkness. Ethan stood frozen, tears filling his eyes. For the first time, he realized how real the danger was. This wasn't just about money. It was something bigger, something that could destroy his father completely. He ran back inside, locked the door, and slid down against it, shaking. He felt small, powerless, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let fear win. The next morning came too quickly. The wedding day. The house was full of noise and excitement. David was smiling, humming happily as he adjusted his suit. "You ready for the big day, champ?" he asked. Ethan forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, Dad," but inside he was screaming. Melissa came down the stairs in her robe, pretending to be the perfect bride. When she saw Ethan, she smiled sweetly. "Good morning, Ethan," she said. "Are you excited?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes looked sharp, as if she knew something. Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at her, remembering Mark's words from last night. "Stay out of it." He knew she was dangerous now. They both were. When she turned away, Ethan whispered under his breath, "I'm not afraid of you." Hours later, they arrived at the church. Guests were already waiting, smiling, taking pictures. Everything looked beautiful. The flowers, the music, the white lights. But for Ethan, it all felt fake. He sat quietly at the back, watching Melissa laugh with her friends. Then, as she adjusted her veil, she glanced toward the window. For a brief moment, Ethan followed her eyes and saw him, Mark standing outside watching. Their eyes met again and the man smirked. That was the moment Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent. He had to stop it. He had to protect his dad, even if no one believed him, even if it caused chaos, because the truth was too big to hide now. The countdown had already begun, and Ethan was ready to risk everything to end it. The church bells rang loudly as guests filled the pews. Laughter, chatter, and music floated through the air. It was supposed to be the happiest day of David's life, but for Ethan, it felt like walking into a nightmare. He sat in the last row, hands clenched tightly together, watching every move Melissa made. She looked beautiful, smiling at everyone, pretending to be the perfect bride. But Ethan knew the truth behind that smile. He could still hear Mark's warning in his head. "Keep your mouth shut tomorrow or things might get messy." His stomach twisted, but he didn't care. He had already made his choice. He was going to stop the wedding no matter what. The ceremony began. The priest's calm voice filled the room. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join David and Melissa in holy matrimony." David smiled proudly at his bride, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Ethan could barely breathe. Every second felt heavier. His father's happiness was seconds away from being destroyed, but Ethan knew it was better than letting him walk into a trap. He looked around. The guests were all smiling, some wiping tears, taking pictures. Everything looked perfect, perfect enough to hide a lie. Then from the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed something that made his heart stop. Mark, the same man standing near the church doors, half hidden behind a pillar, wearing a black jacket and sunglasses. His eyes were fixed on Melissa, and his expression was sharp, cold, waiting. Ethan's breath caught. He looked at Melissa. She had seen him too. For a split second, her smile faded. Her fingers trembled as she held the bouquet. But then she looked down and quickly smiled again, pretending nothing was wrong. That was it. Ethan knew this was his moment. The priest turned to David. "Do you, David, take Melissa to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," David said softly, his eyes glowing with love. The priest turned to Melissa. "And do you, Melissa?" Before she could finish, Ethan stood up, his voice cutting through the music and whispers. "Stop the wedding!" The words echoed through the church like thunder. Gasps filled the room. The music stopped instantly. Everyone turned to see where the voice had come from. David's smile vanished. Melissa froze. The priest looked confused. "What's going on?" Someone whispered. Cameras turned, guests began recording. Ethan stood tall, though his knees were shaking. "Dad, she's lying to you!" he shouted, his voice cracking but strong enough for everyone to hear. David blinked, completely lost. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Melissa's face went pale. She took a step back, whispering, "Ethan, please, don't do this." But Ethan didn't stop. "She's been talking to someone named Mark. He's outside right now." The guests gasped again. David turned toward the church doors, confusion and panic mixing on his face. "What is he saying, Melissa?" She shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "I don't know. He's just a child. He doesn't understand." Ethan's voice rose. "I saw the messages on your phone. You're lying to him. You're using him." He pulled out his phone and held it up. "I have proof." He swiped the screen, showing the photos of the texts, reading them out loud. "Once you marry him, we'll get what we came for. Don't mess this up." The entire hall went silent. The only sound was the echo of Ethan's voice. Melissa's bouquet fell to the floor. Her hands shook uncontrollably. "No," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Ethan, please, is it true?" David asked, his voice trembling. Melissa looked at him, her lips trembling, unable to speak. "Tell me it's not true," he said again, his tone breaking. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the back of the church. The doors burst open and everyone turned in shock. Mark stormed in, his sunglasses gone, his eyes wild with anger. "Melissa!" "Let's go," he shouted. Chaos exploded instantly. Guests screamed. Some ran for the exits. Others pulled out their phones to record the unbelievable scene. The priest backed away in fear. David stood frozen, staring at the man who had just entered. "Who are you?" he demanded. Mark ignored him. "Melissa, we don't have time for this. Move." He grabbed her arm, but she pulled away, crying. "Mark, stop, please." "I was supposed to be done by now," he yelled. "Do you want me to finish it myself?" The tension in the air was unbearable. David stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Don't touch her," he shouted, grabbing Mark by the shoulder. Mark turned and punched him hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back. The guests screamed louder. Ethan ran to his father. "Dad!" he cried, kneeling beside him. David groaned, trying to stand up. "Ethan, stay back." The police sirens wailed outside. Someone must have called them. Mark looked around, panicked. He turned to run, but the officers burst through the door just in time. "Hands up!" one shouted. Mark froze. Melissa fell to her knees, crying uncontrollably. David, holding his chest, looked at her with pain and disbelief. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why did you do this?" Melissa shook her head, tears pouring down her face. "I didn't mean to hurt you, David. I was scared. He made me do it." The officers handcuffed Mark, dragging him outside as the crowd watched in shock. Ethan held his father's hand tightly, both of them trembling. The wedding that was supposed to be filled with love had turned into chaos. The truth had exploded like a bomb, and nothing would ever be the same again. David looked at his son, his eyes filled with gratitude and guilt. "You were right," he whispered. "You saved me." Ethan hugged him tightly. "I just didn't want to lose you, Dad." Around them, the church was silent now. No music, no laughter, just the sound of broken hearts and truth finally revealed. The sirens outside faded as the police car took Mark away, leaving a heavy silence behind. Inside the church, the guests slowly began to leave, whispering in shock, recording videos and talking about what had just happened. The once beautiful wedding now looked like a battlefield. Flowers scattered, chairs knocked over, and tears on almost every face. David sat on one of the pews, still breathing heavily, his tie loosened, eyes staring blankly ahead. Ethan sat beside him, his small hand holding his father's tightly. Melissa knelt on the floor a few feet away, crying softly, her mascara running down her cheeks. The priest stood awkwardly at a distance, not knowing what to say or do. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then David finally turned his head toward Melissa. His voice was calm but cold. "I want to know everything. No lies this time." Melissa looked up slowly, her lips trembling. "David, please. I never meant for it to go this far." "Go this far?" David repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "You plan to marry me just to steal from me, Melissa. How far did you want it to go?" Melissa shook her head quickly, tears falling faster. "It wasn't like that at first, I swear. I met Mark months ago. He said he could help me. I was broke, desperate. My mother was sick, and I needed money. He promised he'd take care of everything if I just helped him with one thing." David frowned. "And that was?" She looked down. "He wanted me to marry someone rich, someone trusting. He said he'd handle the rest." David's jaw tightened. "So you chose me?" "No," she cried. "I didn't choose you, he did. But when I met you, Her voice cracked. "I fell in love with you for real, David. That's the truth." Ethan glared at her, his young voice cutting through the silence. "If you loved him, why did you keep lying?" Melissa's shoulders slumped. "Because I was scared, Ethan. Mark threatened me. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt me." "Or hurt you?" Ethan blinked, confused. "Me?" Melissa nodded slowly. "He knew everything about you and your dad. He said he'd make it look like an accident if I didn't do what he said." David looked at her in disbelief. "So you were just going to go along with it? Marry me and then what? Steal my company? My money?" She wiped her tears. "He said he just needed access to your business documents. I didn't know his real plan until it was too late." "And what was his real plan?" David asked sharply. Melissa hesitated. "He wanted to ruin you, David. He wanted revenge." David frowned deeply. "Revenge? For what?" Melissa swallowed hard. "Mark used to work for your company. Years ago. He was fired for stealing funds. He told me you destroyed his life. He wanted to destroy yours in return." David leaned back, shocked. "Mark Jennings. I remember him now." His hands tightened into fists. "He was a liar and a thief even back then." Melissa nodded. "He said you ruined his career. He found me and used me to get close to you. But after a while, I couldn't do it anymore. I wanted to tell you the truth, but he was always watching." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening just a little. "So that's why he was outside the window the other day." Melissa nodded. "Yes, he followed me everywhere. I couldn't escape." David's anger slowly began to fade, replaced with exhaustion and pain. He rubbed his forehead, shaking his head. "You could have told me, Melissa. I would have helped you. But you lied to me every day." Melissa reached out her hand, her voice breaking. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I didn't want this to happen. I love you, David." David looked at her hand for a long moment before standing up. "Love doesn't lie, Melissa." She broke down completely, crying uncontrollably. Ethan stood quietly beside his father, unsure of what to say. The police officer who had stayed behind approached them. "Sir, we'll need both of you to come down to the station to make a statement." David nodded weakly. "Of course." He looked down at Melissa. "Are you too?" Melissa nodded silently, wiping her tears. As they walked toward the church doors, David turned to Ethan. "You did the right thing, son. You were brave." Ethan looked up at him with watery eyes. "I was scared, Dad." David smiled faintly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you did what's right even when you were." They stepped outside into the cool evening air. The flashing red and blue lights painted their faces in color. Reporters had already started gathering outside, trying to get a story. David ignored them, guiding Ethan toward the car. Behind them, Melissa followed quietly, her head bowed. For a moment, David turned back to look at the church, now empty and silent. The day that was supposed to be filled with joy had turned into one he would never forget. Ethan slipped his hand into his father's. "Dad?" he said softly. "Yes, son?" "Do you think she really loved you?" David looked at the ground for a moment before answering. "Maybe she did, Ethan. But sometimes love isn't enough to make people honest." Ethan nodded, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of his father's words. As they drove away, the church bells began to ring again in the distance. Not for celebration this time, but like an echo of everything lost and broken. Days passed after the disastrous wedding, but the shock still hung heavy over David and Ethan's home. The once warm and cheerful house felt quiet, almost hollow. Reporters had camped outside for 2 days, eager to get comments about the wedding scandal that shocked everyone. David refused to speak to anyone. He turned off his phone, shut the curtains, and avoided calls from friends. Ethan tried to act normal, but he could see his father's sadness in every movement. David spent hours sitting in the living room, staring at the engagement photo of him and Melissa, still framed on the table. He hadn't thrown it away yet, maybe because part of him didn't know how to let go. Ethan walked in quietly, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Dad," he said softly, "you should eat something." David gave a weak smile. "Thanks, buddy. I'm not really hungry." Ethan sat beside him. "Are you still mad at her?" David sighed deeply, his eyes never leaving the photo. "I don't know if I'm mad, Ethan. Maybe I'm just disappointed. I thought she was different." Ethan hesitated. "Do you think she was telling the truth? About Mark threatening her?" David leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I think parts of it were true. Mark was dangerous. I saw it in his eyes that day. But she still made her choice." Ethan nodded, sipping his drink. "She said she loved you." David smiled sadly. "Yeah, and maybe she did. But love can't survive lies, Ethan. It just breaks apart." The house went silent again. Outside, rain began to fall softly, tapping against the windows. The sound filled the quiet room like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. David frowned, not expecting anyone. He opened the door slowly and froze. Standing there, soaking wet from the rain, was Melissa. She looked pale, her eyes red from crying, holding a small brown envelope. "David," she whispered, her voice weak. "Please, I just need to talk." David hesitated. Every instinct told him to close the door, but something in her voice, guilt, sorrow, made him pause. "You shouldn't be here," he said firmly. "The police are still investigating everything." She nodded quickly. "I know, but I needed to see you one last time. Please, just 5 minutes." David glanced back at Ethan, who was standing in the hallway watching. "It's okay, Dad," Ethan said softly. "I'll be upstairs." He went up the stairs quietly, leaving them alone. David stepped aside. 5 minutes. Melissa stepped in, dripping water on the floor. She looked around at the quiet house, then back at him. "I've been questioned by the police. They know now that Mark was behind everything. They found messages and money transfers. They said I might not have to go to jail if I keep helping them." David folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "That's good. I'm glad justice is being done." She took a shaky breath. "But I didn't come here for that." She reached into the envelope and pulled out a small silver necklace, Ethan's necklace. "This was in the church after everything happened. I kept it safe. I thought he might want it back." David looked at it for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Thank you." He reached out and took it from her hand, their fingers brushing briefly. "Was that all?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears again. "No, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For lying to you. For breaking your trust. For letting things go this far. I never wanted you to get hurt." David's face softened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "You did hurt me, Melissa. You hurt Ethan, too. He looked up to you." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I know. I'll never forgive myself for that, but I want you to know that what I felt for you, it was real. Maybe not at first, but it became real." David looked away, staring out the window at the falling rain. "Maybe it was. But I can't go back to that, Melissa. Not after everything." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I understand. I just wanted you to hear it from me before I disappear." "Disappear," he repeated. She nodded. "The police will keep me in witness protection until the trial is over. Mark's people are still out there, and they know I betrayed him." David's expression darkened. "So you're leaving town?" "Yes," she whispered. "Tonight." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain and their quiet breathing. Then Melissa smiled faintly through her tears. "Take care of Ethan. He's a brave boy." "He saved you," David nodded slowly. "I know." "He's my hero." Melissa's eyes glistened. "Goodbye, David." She turned toward the door, but before she could step out, David said softly, "Melissa." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "Yeah, I forgive you," he said quietly. She froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't turn around, she just nodded, her voice breaking. "Thank you." And then she walked out into the rain, disappearing into the night. David stood there for a long time, the necklace cold in his hand. When he finally closed the door, he looked up the stairs and saw Ethan standing there, watching. "Is she gone?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," David said softly. "She's gone." Ethan came down, hugging his father tightly. "It's okay, Dad," David nodded, hugging him back. "Yes, son, it will be." Outside, the rain kept falling, washing away the last traces of a love built on lies, but maybe leaving behind the first drops of healing.